On an ordinary Friday, a bank and a hostage who doesn't tremble. 4 armed men entered thinking they had control, but when you close the doors, make sure the monster isn't inside. Before we begin, like and subscribe so we can continue creating stories like this one. On that suffocating Friday afternoon, the air felt heavy in Oak Hollow, a medium-sized town in the state of Arizona. The typical scorching May heat seemed to melt the asphalt, while the few pedestrians sought refuge under the scarce shadows cast by the colonial buildings. Among them stood the National Commerce Bank branch, a 2-story building with a yellow facade and large windows, where a handful of customers conducted their weekend transactions. Inside, the air conditioning system barely relieved the temperature. The ceiling fans spun lazily, moving the hot air without really cooling it. In one of the seats near the teller windows, a middle-aged man remained seated, his gaze lost in some undefined point. He wore a worn grey shirt, jeans, and a cap that partially shadowed his face. His name was Ethan Voss, although it had been a long time since anyone had called him that. The tranquility of the bank shattered when 4 men burst abruptly through the main door. Their faces were partially covered with bandanas and caps, and the tallest of them, clearly the leader, pulled out a pistol that he pointed at the ceiling. "Everyone on the floor, this is a robbery!" he shouted in a hoarse voice. Panic spread like a shockwave. Customers threw themselves to the floor, some began to cry, others to pray quietly. The employees, trained for these situations, raised their hands. Only Ethan remained motionless, as if the scene had nothing to do with him. "You on the floor," ordered one of the robbers, a thin man with a visible scar on his neck. Ethan obeyed slowly, unhurriedly, and sat on the floor with the other hostages. His gaze, however, was different. There was no fear in it, but a strange analytical calm, like someone observing a chessboard calculating the next moves. The leader, who answered to the name Wolf, went directly to the bank manager, a woman in her 40s who was visibly trembling. "Open the safe, and do it quickly," he demanded, pushing her toward the back of the bank. Meanwhile, the other 3 men, whom Wolf called Raven, Tiger, and Snake, watched the hostages and collected mobile phones from everyone. When Snake reached Ethan, he noticed something strange about him. "This one's not afraid," he remarked, puzzled. "Are you a cop or something?" Ethan gently shook his head. "I'm just a customer." His voice sounded calm, almost musical. There was an indefinite accent, as if he had lived in many different places. Snake wasn't convinced. He gestured to Tiger, a burly man with tattooed arms. "Check him thoroughly." Tiger approached Ethan and roughly patted him down, looking for weapons or police badges. He found nothing, but the man's serene behavior disturbed him. Meanwhile, the manager had led Wolf to the safe in the back. Her trembling hands could barely enter the correct combination. "Hurry up," Wolf pressured her, hitting the wall beside her with his fist, making her jump even more. "The system has a security delay," she explained in a broken voice. "I can't open it any faster." At that moment, an alarm began to sound, a sharp and persistent beep that froze the blood of the robbers. Almost simultaneously, a metallic noise was heard. All the bank doors closed hermetically, activating the security system. "Damn it!" roared Wolf, returning to the main area. "Who activated the alarm?" Nobody answered. The employees looked at each other, confused and terrified. "It must be automatic," one of them finally said. "It's a new security system that was installed a month ago. If it detects a suspicious behavior pattern, the system activates itself." Wolf looked around, assessing the situation. His plan, which should have lasted less than 10 minutes, was now compromised. Outside, police patrols would soon arrive. "Raven, go find another exit. Tiger, watch the windows. Snake, group all the hostages in one place." The men obeyed, while the panic among the hostages increased. Some were openly crying now, others begging to be let go. Ethan remained silent, observing, calculating. Snake began pushing all the hostages toward the bank's meeting room. When he got to Ethan, he looked at him suspiciously. "You come with me," he said, grabbing his arm forcefully. "Wolf will want to talk to you." Ethan allowed himself to be led without resistance. Snake conducted him to a small office where Wolf was trying to communicate by radio with someone outside. "This is the one I told you about," Snake reported. "Something doesn't add up with him." Wolf evaluated Ethan from top to bottom. His eyes, hard and cold, looked for some indication of who he might really be. "What's your name?" he asked in an authoritative tone. "Ethan," he replied without adding anything else. "What were you doing at the bank?" "Waiting my turn to make a deposit." Wolf didn't seem satisfied with the answer. He moved closer to Ethan, deliberately invading his personal space, an intimidation tactic that usually worked with most people. "I don't like mysteries," he said quietly. "There's something about you that doesn't convince me." At that moment, Raven entered the office hurriedly. "We have problems," he announced. "There are already 2 patrol cars outside and more are arriving. They've closed the street." Wolf cursed under his breath. His perfect plan was crumbling by the minute. He looked at Ethan and then at his companions. "Take him to the basement." "Vault," he ordered. "We'll keep him separate from the rest. He might be useful if we need to negotiate." Tiger and Snake led Ethan to a staircase that descended to the bank's basement. There was a small vault for important documents, with a heavy metal door that normally remained locked. "Inside," Tiger ordered, pushing him. Ethan entered without resisting. The small room was cold and smelled of dampness and metal. The only light came from a bare bulb in the ceiling. There were no windows, just walls of reinforced concrete. "Make sure he can't get out," said Snake, handing Tiger some chains they had found in a maintenance closet. Tiger chained Ethan's hands to a pipe on the wall and secured the lock with a padlock. "There you go, nice and quiet," he mocked. "You better not try anything funny." The 2 men left, closing the heavy door behind them. In the darkness of the vault, only the sound of Ethan's measured breathing remained. And then, in the absolute silence, he began to laugh. A soft laugh, barely audible at first, that slowly gained intensity. A laugh that would have frozen the blood of anyone who heard it. "You think you locked me in here," he murmured to himself with a disturbing calmness. "But you were the ones who locked yourselves in with me." Upstairs, the situation was growing tense. Wolf tried to maintain control, but the plan he had imagined as perfect was crumbling like a house of cards. Police sirens resonated ever closer, and the circle was tightening minute by minute. "Damn it," he shouted, slamming his fist on a table. How could everything go so wrong? Raven, the youngest in the group, looked nervously out the window. At 23, this was his first major heist. He had participated in small robberies before, but never in something of this magnitude. "The police are blocking all the streets," he reported in a trembling voice. "There are snipers on the buildings across the street." Tiger, who had just come up from the basement, wiped his sweaty face with his hand. "The guy downstairs gives me the creeps," he confessed. "He doesn't seem scared. It's like this amuses him." Wolf looked at him with irritation. "He's just another customer. Focus on what's important." But even as he said this, something inside told him that Tiger might be right. There was something strange about that man called Ethan, something that didn't fit with the image of a simple bank customer. In the meeting room, the other hostages remained grouped together, some crying silently, others praying. Snake watched them with his weapon raised, pacing nervously back and forth. "We need a strategy," said Wolf, gathering his team in a corner. "The police will want to negotiate. We'll request an armored vehicle and safe passage to the border." "They'll never accept that," Raven replied, increasingly nervous. "That's why we have hostages," Wolf snapped, "and that's why we separated that guy. He'll be our insurance." While they were discussing in the basement, Ethan observed the chains that held him. They weren't much of a challenge for someone with his experience. In another time, in another life, he had freed himself from much more sophisticated restraints. But for now, he decided to wait. It wasn't time yet. His mind involuntarily traveled to the past, to the memories he had tried to bury for the last 5 years. Before becoming Ethan Voss, he had been known by many names in the murky world from which he had escaped. A world where powerful men dictated the rules, and where he had been a tool, a problem solver. He recalled how he had arrived at this lost town in Arizona, seeking anonymity after that last job that went terribly wrong. The image of that innocent woman who was caught in the crossfire still haunted him. Elena Suarez, an elementary school teacher with no connection to the dark world to which he belonged. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. After that, he disappeared. He abandoned the only life he knew and took refuge in Oak Hollow. He got a job as a night watchman at a furniture factory, rented a small house on the outskirts of town, and set out to live in the shadows away from any conflict. And now this, fate, with its twisted sense of humor, had placed him once again in the midst of chaos. Upstairs, the bank's phone began to ring. Everyone looked at each other. "It's the police," said Wolf. "I'll answer. You keep the hostages under control." He picked up the phone with a determined gesture. "Who's speaking?" "I'm Captain Ramirez, from the Federal Police," answered a calm voice on the other end. "We're here to resolve this situation in the most peaceful way possible. Who do I have the pleasure of speaking with?" "You can call me Wolf," he replied dryly. "And this is what's going to happen. I want an armored vehicle at the door in 1 hour. We'll leave with the hostages and release them as we move away from the city. If I see a single suspicious movement, I'll start eliminating hostages." There was silence on the other end of the line. "We need time to get what you're asking for," Ramirez finally responded. "And we need to know that all the hostages are well." "They're fine for now," said Wolf. "You have 1 hour." He hung up abruptly and turned to his team. "We have to hold out for an hour," he told them. "Then we're out of here." Snake nodded, but he didn't seem convinced. "What if they're just buying time to prepare an assault?" "That's why we have the hostages," Wolf replied. "By the way, where's Rick? He should have been back from checking the perimeter by now." Rick was Tiger's real name, who had gone down a while ago to check the basement emergency exits. "He came up with me," Raven said, confused. "He was here a moment ago." Everyone looked around. Rick was nowhere to be seen. "Go look for him," Wolf ordered Raven. "And while you're at it, check on our special hostage." Raven nodded and disappeared down the hallway leading to the basement. The minutes passed with excruciating slowness. The pressure was beginning to take its toll on everyone's nerves. Meanwhile, Ethan remained motionless in the small basement vault. He had heard footsteps a while ago, but no one had entered. A strange silence now reigned on the lower floor. E.T. decided it was time to act. With precise movements that denoted years of practice, he manipulated the chains until he found the weak point of the padlock. He didn't need tools. His fingers, trained for years, were enough. With a barely audible click, the padlock gave way. He freed himself from the chains, taking care not to make noise, and approached the door. It was locked from the outside, but that wasn't a problem either. He took out a small wire that he kept, hidden in the lining of his belt, and in a matter of seconds the lock turned. He opened the door slowly and peered into the dark basement hallway. There was no one in sight, but he could sense a presence. His senses, sharpened by years of working in the shadows, told him he wasn't alone. "Rick," called a voice from the stairs. It was Raven, cautiously descending. "Where are you, man?" Ethan hid behind a column and waited. When Raven passed by him, he grabbed him with a fluid movement, covering his mouth to prevent him from screaming. "Listen carefully," he whispered in his ear. "I'm not going to hurt you if you cooperate. Nod if you understand." Raven, with his eyes bulging with fear, nodded frantically. "Good. Now we're going to go up together and you're going to behave normally," Ethan continued. "If you try anything, I'll know before you do it. Understood?" Another nod from Raven. "Perfect. Let's go." They climbed the stairs with Ethan behind, keeping a firm hand on Raven's shoulder, who was visibly trembling. Upon reaching the top, they encountered Snake, who was guarding the hallway. "Did you find Rick?" he asked, then froze when he saw Ethan. "What the hell?" Before he could react, Ethan was already on him. With precise and rapid movements that evidenced professional training, he subdued Snake without him even being able to cry out. "Where's Rick?" He then asked Raven, who looked at him terrified. "I don't know, I swear," he stammered. "We were all looking for him." Ethan stared at him, assessing if he was telling the truth. Something strange was happening. The man who answered to the name of Rick had mysteriously disappeared, and nobody seemed to know where he was. "How many are you in total?" he asked. "4, Raven automatically replied. "Wolf, Snake, Rick, and me." "And where is Wolf now?" "In the main office, with the hostages. Ethan nodded, and with a quick movement knocked Raven unconscious alongside Snake. He dragged them both to a nearby closet and locked them in there. Then, stealthily, he headed towards the main room where the hostages were. Wolf paced nervously in front of the grouped hostages in the bank's main hall. Sweat drenched his forehead, and his gaze constantly shifted toward the windows, where he could see the police deployment growing minute by minute. The situation was becoming more complicated than he had ever imagined. "Where the hell is everyone?" he muttered to himself, checking his watch. It had been more than 15 minutes since Raven had gone down to look for Rick, and neither had returned. Snake had also disappeared after going to check the perimeter of the building. The bank manager, Sarah Mitchell, carefully observed Wolf's movements. At 42, she had worked at that branch for over a decade, but had never faced a situation like this. However, she maintained her composure for the sake of her employees and customers. "Time is running out," said Wolf, approaching her. "Is there any other exit that's not on the official bank plans?" Sarah shook her head. "All exits are on the plans you've already reviewed, and all are blocked by the security system." Wolf looked at her with contained fury. He knew he was trapped, but refused to accept it. His plan had been meticulous. Enter on a Friday afternoon when the bank would have enough cash but fewer staff, take the money, and leave in less than 10 minutes. Simple and effective. How had everything gone so wrong? The phone rang again, startling him. He approached slowly and picked up. "Well?" he asked without greeting. "We're working on getting the vehicle," replied Captain Ramirez, "but we need a show of good faith. Release some hostages, especially the most vulnerable ones." Wolf laughed bitterly. "Good faith? Did I receive any show of good faith when that damned security system locked us in here? That was an automatic mechanism, not a decision of ours," Ramirez explained in a measured voice. "Release the children and the elderly, and you'll get your vehicle faster." Wolf considered the proposal for a moment. In reality, the hostages were his only bargaining chip, but also a responsibility. The fewer he had to control, the better. "Fine," he finally conceded. "I'll release 5 hostages. 2 children, 2 elderly, and a pregnant woman, but I want to see that vehicle at the door in 30 minutes. "You'll have it," promised Ramirez. "We'll send an ambulance to pick up the hostages you release." Wolf hung up and turned to the group. He quickly identified those to whom he would keep his word: an elderly woman who was breathing with difficulty, an older man with a cane, 2 children who were sobbing as they hugged their mother, and a young pregnant woman about 6 months along. "You 5, he pointed. "You're going to leave now. When the ambulance arrives, you'll walk slowly toward it with your hands up. No sudden movements or tricks." The chosen ones looked at each other, not knowing whether to feel relief or fear about what might happen to them when they left. "Can I go with my children?" asked the mother, a young woman with an anguished face. Wolf looked at her coldly. "No, only they leave. You stay as a guarantee that they'll behave with me if they try anything." The children began to cry harder, clinging to their mother. "You'll be fine," she assured them, though her voice trembled. "Mommy will be fine, and we'll see each other very soon." While this scene unfolded, Ethan moved stealthily through the bank corridors. He had located Wolf in the main hall and was observing the situation from the shadows. He could clearly see that the leader of the robbers was losing control, which made him even more dangerous. He also noticed something that powerfully caught his attention. Rick didn't appear anywhere, and Wolf seemed concerned about his absence. Where had he gone? A hunch led him to check the building more thoroughly. With the stealth of years of training, he systematically searched every corner. In a small maintenance room, he found something disturbing. Rick lay on the floor, breathing with difficulty. He didn't seem physically injured, but his condition was alarming. "What happened to you?" Ethan asked in a whisper, kneeling beside him. Rick looked at him with glassy eyes, as if he didn't recognize him. "I saw her," he murmured almost inaudibly. "I saw her." "Who did you see?" "Carmen, my sister. But she's..." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Rick was delirious, talking about seeing a person who apparently was no longer among the living. But What really concerned him was something else. He hadn't done this. If Rick was in this state, someone else had reduced him. The idea that there was another person manipulating the situation from the shadows completely altered the picture. He left Rick where he was and continued his search, now with all his senses on high alert. He not only had to worry about Wolf and the police outside, but about a third player whose intentions he didn't know. In the main hall, the ambulance had arrived and the 5 chosen hostages were preparing to leave. Wolf had temporarily deactivated the main door's lock using codes that the manager had provided under threat. Remember, he warned those who were about to leave, walk slowly with your hands up. If the police try anything, your relatives in here will suffer the consequences. The hostages nodded, terrified, and began walking toward the exit. Wolf followed them with his weapon, strategically staying protected behind a column to avoid offering an easy target to the snipers he knew were positioned in the surrounding buildings. Ethan observed everything from his hidden position. It was the perfect moment to act, with Wolf distracted by the release of the hostages. But something stopped him. A sixth sense, developed over years of experience, told him to wait. That there was something else at stake that he wasn't seeing. And then he noticed it, a reflection, a small metallic glint in one of the bank's upper windows. Someone else was observing the scene from there. With extreme caution, Ethan headed toward that location. He stealthily climbed up a service staircase to the 2nd floor and advanced down a dark hallway. The door at the end was ajar, and from there came a barely perceptible breathing. He pushed the door slowly, and what he saw left him momentarily paralyzed. A woman was sitting calmly in an armchair next to the window, looking down at the scene of the hostages' release. She wore an impeccable black suit, and her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun. When she felt Ethan's presence, she turned slowly. Their gazes met, and a mutual recognition illuminated their faces. "Alexandra," Ethan murmured, feeling how his past came back suddenly to slap him. "Ethan," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Or should I say Victor Reeves, which was your real name? It's been a long time." Alexandra Vance had been his partner in that previous life he had tried so hard to forget. Together, they had carried out operations for the organization, always in the shadows, always efficient, until everything went wrong in that last mission and their paths separated. "What are you doing here?" Ethan asked, though he already intuited the answer. "The same as you, apparently," she responded calmly. "I was making a simple deposit when these amateurs decided to enter. An interesting coincidence, don't you think?" Ethan didn't believe in coincidences. He never had. "Was it you who left Rick in that state?" he asked directly. Alexandra shrugged, an elegant and calculated gesture. "He was becoming a problem. He started searching places he shouldn't. When he found me, I had to deal with him." "What exactly did you do to him?" "Nothing permanent, just a little scare, enough to keep him out of the game for a while." Ethan knew that Alexandra was an expert in mental control techniques. She could provoke hallucinations so vivid that they left her targets temporarily incapacitated. "Why are you really here, Alexandra?" he insisted. "And don't tell me it's a coincidence." She looked at him steadily for a few seconds before answering. "I've been looking for you, Victor, for 5 years. It wasn't easy. You hid well." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. 5 years running, 5 years trying to bury his past, and now he had it in front of him in the form of the person who had known him best. "The organization needs you back," Alexandra continued. "Things have changed. Don William is no longer in charge. The new leadership wants to recover its best elements, and you were the best of all." Ethan clenched his fists. Don William had been the one who ordered that last mission, the one that ended Elena Suarez's life. "I'm not interested," he replied dryly. "That life is behind me." Alexandra laughed softly. "Really? Look at yourself now, in the middle of a robbery, manipulating the situation from the shadows. You haven't changed that much, Victor. This is different. I had no choice." "There's always a choice," she contradicted. "You could have thrown yourself on the floor like the other hostages, but no, you had to take control." Ethan knew there was some truth in her words. and that was what hurt the most. Perhaps he could never completely escape who he had been. And who decides who deserves it? Before Alexandra could respond, a noise interrupted them. Below, Wolf was shouting orders frantically. The released hostages had reached the ambulance, but something wasn't right. Wolf was waving his weapon, alternately pointing at the remaining hostages and toward the door. "It seems our friend is losing control," Alexandra observed with disdain. Ethan peered cautiously. The police had taken advantage of the hostages, released to get closer to the bank, violating the tacit agreement they had with Wolf. He, feeling betrayed, was now threatening to take reprisals against the remaining hostages. "This is going to end badly," Ethan murmured. "Not if we do something about it," Alexandra replied. "Like in the old days." Their gazes met, and for an instant, Ethan felt again that connection they had shared years ago. They worked well together. They always had. They were like two halves of the same mechanism, complementing each other. Perfectly. "What's your plan?" he finally asked. Alexandra smiled, knowing she had won this small battle. "We need to separate Wolf from the hostages. He's too nervous, and that makes him unpredictable. I could use Snake and Raven, who I left, unconscious in the hallway closet." "Unconscious? I see you haven't lost your touch," she commented with an appreciative smile. "Perfect. We can create a distraction using their radios." The plan was quickly drawn between them, as if the years of separation had never existed. They went down together to the first floor, moving among the shadows with the synchronization of those who have worked together for a long time. Ethan recovered Snake and Raven's radios, while Alexandra positioned herself strategically near the key. Main hall, where Wolf was keeping the remaining hostages. "Do you copy?" Ethan whispered over the radio. On the other side, Wolf responded immediately. "Raven, where the hell have you been?" I found a way out," replied Ethan perfectly, imitating Raven's nervous voice. It was another of his talents, one he had perfected over the years. "In the basement behind the main vault, an old tunnel." "A tunnel? Are you sure?" "Positive, but I need help to open the last door. It's heavy." Wolf hesitated for a moment. "And Snake and Rick?" "Snake is with me. Rick, we don't know where he is." After a moment of silence, Wolf made a decision. "I'm coming. Hold your position." Ethan looked at Alexandra and nodded. The bait had been cast, and Wolf had taken it. "I need to check something," Wolf announced to the hostages. "If anyone moves, I'll come back and start shooting. Is that clear?" The seats hostages nodded, terrified. Sarah Mitchell, the manager, maintained apparent calm, but her hands trembled slightly. As soon as Wolf disappeared down the hallway leading to the basement, Alexandra moved quickly. With the agility of a shadow, she slipped into the main hall and presented herself before the surprised hostages. "I'm an undercover federal agent," she announced, with an authority that admitted no questions. "We're going to get you out of here, but you must follow my instructions exactly." Meanwhile, Ethan waited for Wolf in the hallway leading to the basement. When he heard his hurried footsteps, he hid in a dark recess. Wolf passed by him without seeing him, the tension evident in every line of his body. "Raven," Wolf called upon reaching the empty basement. "Where are you?" Ethan moved silently behind him, approaching like a shadow. "Right here," he replied, in his normal voice. Wolf turned abruptly, but it was too late. Ethan was already on him. With precise and controlled movements, he disarmed him in a matter of seconds. Wolf's pistol fell to the floor with a metallic noise. "Who the hell are you?" growled Wolf, recognizing the hostage he had locked in the vault. "Someone who's tired of amateurs like you complicating things," Ethan replied calmly. Wolf tried to attack him, but his movements were crude, imprecise, those of a man accustomed to relying more on his weapons than on his physical skill. Ethan dodged the attack easily and counterattacked with precision. 1 hit, 2, 3. The first rays of dawn filtered through the windows of the small apartment. On the outskirts of Oak Hollow, Ethan Voss, sitting on the edge of his bed, observed the card that Alexandra had slipped into his pocket before disappearing. A simple phone number, no name, no address. An open door to his past. 3 days had passed since the incident at the bank. 3 days during which he hadn't stopped thinking about everything that happened, about the revelations, about the possibilities. The local television wouldn't stop talking about the mysterious robbery that ended with the robbers subdued and the hostages safe. Theories abounded, from internal fights among the criminals to the intervention of undercover agents. Nobody really knew what had happened, and that was exactly how Ethan and Alexandra had planned it. Ethan had managed to blend in with the hostages during the evacuation and leave without being noticed. When the police finally entered the bank, they found the 4 robbers incapacitated and secured. The confused and contradictory statements of the 4 men only contributed to increasing the mystery. Now, in the solitude of his apartment, Ethan faced the most important decision of his life since he had disappeared 5 years ago. The sound of the phone pulled him from his thoughts. Nobody had his number except his employer at the furniture factory. He answered cautiously. "Ethan Voss?" asked an unknown male voice. "Who's speaking?" he replied, immediately on alert. "My name is Gabriel Martin. I work with Alexandra Vance. I'd like to meet with you to discuss a proposal." Ethan felt his heart accelerate. He hadn't given his number to anyone, which meant they were already watching him. "I don't know any Alexandra Vance," he lied naturally. "We both know that's not true, Mr. Reeves," replied Gabriel, deliberately using his old name. "Or would you prefer I call you by one of your other aliases, the Ghost?" "The silent one?" Ethan remained silent, evaluating his options. He could continue denying, hang up and disappear again, or he could face what was coming. "Where and when?" he finally asked. "This afternoon at 5, the Hope Cafe downtown. I'll come alone." "I'll be watching you," Ethan warned. "If I see anything I don't like, I'll disappear." "I understand perfectly," replied Gabriel in a tone that suggested a smile. "So until then." The call ended, leaving Ethan with a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. Who was this Gabriel Martin? What kind of proposal would he want to discuss? He spent the next few hours meticulously preparing. First, he investigated the Hope Cafe, a small but popular place downtown with multiple entrances and exits, perfect for a discreet meeting but also for a quick escape if necessary. Then he carefully checked his apartment. If they had located him, they had probably tried to install surveillance devices. With years of experience, he found 2 hidden microphones, one in the lamp in his living room and another under the kitchen table. He left them where they were. Let them think he hadn't detected them. At 4 in the afternoon, he left his apartment, dressed in a discreet but elegant manner. Dark pants, a light blue shirt, and a light jacket that perfectly concealed the small pistol he had recovered from his secret hiding place. 5 years without using it, but he still kept it in perfect condition. He arrived downtown 40 minutes before the agreed time. He moved naturally through the streets, occasionally stopping to look at shop windows, while carefully observing the reflections in the glass, looking for possible followers. He detected none, which worried him more than if he had seen them. Whoever was behind this was professional. At 4:30, he entered a small bookstore across from the Hope Cafe. From there, he could perfectly observe the entrance and part of the interior of the establishment. At 4:50, a man in his 50s, with grey hair and an impeccable dark grey suit, entered the cafe and sat at a table next to the window, alone as he had promised. Ethan observed him for 10 minutes. The man ordered a coffee, took out a book and began to read calmly. He didn't seem nervous, nor did he constantly look around. The perfect image of an executive enjoying a moment of tranquility. At 5:05, Ethan crossed the street and entered the cafe. He went directly to the man in the grey suit's table. "Gabriel Martin?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The man looked up from his book and smiled. "Mr. Voss, or should I say, Mr. Reeves. Please, sit down." Ethan sat across from him, maintaining an apparently relaxed but alert posture, with quick access to his weapon if necessary. "I'll get straight to the point," Gabriel began, closing his book. "I represent a new entity, risen from the ashes of what you knew as the organization. We call ourselves the Aurora Foundation." "Sounds poetic," Ethan commented skeptically. Gabriel smiled slightly. We are a private organization dedicated to special operations, some for governments, others for private entities, always under strict ethical codes. Since when do assassins have ethical codes? We're not that anymore, Mr. Reeves. After Don Williams' fall, many of us decided it was time for a fundamental change. We continue to use the skills we developed under his command, but for different purposes. Ethan looked at him intently, searching for signs of deception. What kind of purposes? Mainly, dismantling corruption networks that official authorities can't touch due to legal or political limitations, recovering assets stolen by dictators and returning them to their countries of origin, protecting witnesses that official programs cannot or will not protect. Sounds too noble to be true, replied Ethan, although a part of him wanted to believe. Gabriel took a tablet from his briefcase and slid it toward Ethan. These are some of our recent projects. You can verify the results in the international press. Ethan reviewed the files, meticulously documented operations in Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, corrupt officials exposed, exploitation networks dismantled, victims protected and compensated. All without a single mention of Aurora or any similar entity. Just results attributed to anonymous sources or leaks. Even if all this is true, he finally said, returning the tablet, why are you looking for me after so long? Because you were the best, Mr. Reeves, and because we understand why you left. What happened with Elena Suarez was unforgivable. Upon hearing that name, Ethan felt every muscle in his body tense. What do you know about her? We know she was an innocent victim of an internal war that should never have affected civilians. We know her death was what made you leave everything behind. And we know who gave the order that led to that tragedy. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Don Williams said it was an accident, erroneous information. Gabriel slowly shook his head. Don William lied to you. The order came directly from James Schofield, his second in command. He knew you were beginning to question certain operations, and he wanted to ensure your loyalty through an emotional blow. Elena Suarez was deliberately chosen. The revelation hit Ethan like a physical punch. He had always suspected there was something more behind that mission, but this... Do you have evidence? He asked in a controlled voice, though inside he felt rage growing. Gabriel extracted a small USB device and placed it on the table. Everything is here: encrypted communications, financial transfers, testimonies from people who are no longer with us. James Schofield is still alive, Mr. Reeves, and he's still operating, though now under another name and with other allies. Ethan looked at the small device as if it were a venomous snake. It contained the answers he had sought for 5 years, but it also represented a door to a past from which he had tried to escape. What exactly do you want from me? We want to offer you the opportunity to do justice and, at the same time, use your skills for something truly worthwhile. A purpose, Mr. Reeves. Something more meaningful than watching over a furniture factory at night. Ethan remained silent, weighing his words, evaluating the sincerity in his gaze. Alexandra is in this, continued Gabriel. She was the one who insisted on finding you. She trusts you, despite the years and circumstances, and I trust her judgment. I need time to think about it, Ethan finally replied. Of course, Gabriel nodded, standing up, but not too much. Things are changing rapidly. There are movements in the shadows that require immediate action. He handed him a card similar to the one Alexandra had given him. When you decide, call this number. Day or night, someone will answer. Gabriel left enough money on the table to pay for both coffees and headed for the exit. Before leaving, he turned one last time. One more thing, Mr. Reeves. If you decide not to join us, we'll respect your decision. Your location will remain a secret. You have my word. And with that, he disappeared into the evening crowd. Ethan remained seated, looking at the USB and the card in front of him. Two small objects that represented a completely different future than the one he had imagined for himself over the past 5 years. That night, in his apartment, he meticulously reviewed the contents of the USB, each document, each recording, each piece of evidence pointed to the same devastating conclusion. Elena Suarez had been deliberately sacrificed as part of a political maneuver within the organization. Her death had not been an accident or collateral damage. It had been planned. The hours passed as Ethan absorbed the information, feeling something inside him transform. The guilt he had carried for years for not being able to save her slowly turned into a cold and clear resolution. At dawn, he made his decision. He took out the card Gabriel had given him and dialed the number. "I'm in," he said simply, when a voice answered on the other end. "Welcome back, Mr. Reeves," replied the voice, which he recognized as Gabriel's. "Our car will pick you up in an hour." Ethan hung up and began to prepare. He didn't take much: some clothes, essential documents, and the small pistol that had been his silent companion for so many years. There was nothing in that apartment that really belonged to him, nothing that defined who he really was. While waiting for the car, he looked one last time at the humble space that had been his refuge. Ethan Voss, the night watchman at the furniture factory, would disappear today, as mysteriously as he had appeared 5 years ago. In his place, Victor Reeves was reborn, not as the instrument he once was, but as a man with his own purpose, with a clear mission. Justice for Elena, and perhaps in the process redemption for himself. Exactly 1 hour later, a black sedan stopped in front of his building. At the wheel was Alexandra, her serene face illuminated by the golden light of dawn. "Ready?" she asked when Ethan got into the passenger seat. He nodded, looking ahead. "Tell me about James Schofield." Alexandra smiled slightly as she put the car in motion. "All in good time, Victor. All in good time." The sedan drove away, disappearing on the highway that led out of Oak Hollow, taking with it the silent man, whose true story was just beginning to be written. Dear listeners, we hope that Ethan Voss's story has kept you on the edge of your seats. To continue this journey through shadows and mysteries, we've prepared a special list with equally captivating tales that you can find by clicking to your left. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring new stories that explore the depths of the human soul and the secrets we all keep. We await you in the comments to hear your theories about Ethan's true destiny. What would you do in his place? The next story might be even more shocking.